Dear student, my name is Dr. Srinivas Goli. I am an assistant professor in population studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. Under UGC MHRD's E-Pathshala program, we are dealing a paper on population structure and characteristics. Within this paper, today I am presenting a module on sex and gender. In this module, our learning objectives are to understand the concept of sex and gender, to understand the difference between sex and gender, to understand the sex roles and gender roles, to understand the theories of gender differences. However, before going to the concept of sex and gender, we need to know why we need to study gender itself. What are the gender questions which are important for the understanding of the gender and sex differences? The important gender questions are: what happens if gender inequality is not ensured? How does gender inequality affect women? Are there any other gender related challenges? But why should gender equality matter to me? What can we do to fix these issues? Answers to all these questions lies in understanding gender itself. Though among all the rationalists for the study in gender, the important rationale comes out to be the economic reasons to study gender. Women and girls represent half of the world's population, therefore half of its potential. Today, gender inequality persists everywhere and stagnates not only social progress but also economic progress. Gender inequality is not only a persisting moral and social issue but also critical economic challenge. If women who account for half of the world's working age population and do not achieve their full economic potential, the global economy will suffer and the country's economies will suffer. The many studies have counted the global economic loss due to gender inequality. It is as high as $12 trillion loss due to women's inequality, gender inequality in the world, and it is substantially contributing to the lack of global economic growth as its potential. Gender parity is a moral issue. It is a human right issue. Therefore, it is important to understand the concept of gender, but the understanding the problem of gender lies in understanding gender itself and how does it differ from sex. If you look at the concept of gender and sex as an aspect of one's biological makeup that depends on whether one is born with the distinct male or female genitals and genetic program that releases either male or female hormones to stimulate the development of one's reproductive system. Gender, one's sense of being male or female and playing masculine or feminine roles in a ways defined and appropriate by one's culture and society. If you look at this figure, sex is a biological term which is apparent from the physical appearances of these male and female bodies, whereas gender is a social term. If you look at these two people, the men wearing a different dress compared to a female, and female have a different cultural attribute which is visible in the form of their dress culture. Unlike sex, gender is not determined just by biology. Research shows that babies first develop a vague sense of gender identity between as low as from age 2 to 3 years. The social learning of gender starts at the childhood. Once the social learning of gender takes hold, it is apparently very difficult to undo also, even by means of constructive surgery or hormones or parental or professional pressure. Thus, one can say that gender is an anatomy and physiology and genes and hormones, while sex is anatomy, physiology, genes and hormones, and gender is the roles, traits, behavior and power. The early debates of sex and gender dates back to the literature of Thomas Arthur and Patrick Geddes in their book The Evolution of Sex in 1889, where they have proposed the biological determinism principle. According to biological determinism principle, men and women are different based on their physiology, and men are powerful compared to women based on their physiological advantage. Whereas gender is a socialization principle, where the children are socialized in a different way. The male children are socialized in a masculine way, which is called masculine socialization, which is constituted of a dominant class. The female children are socialized in a feminine way, which is called feminine socialization, which is constituted of a subordinate class. So it is a social construct. Gender is a social construct. Therefore, there are theories which explains these gender differences. The first theory is essentialism, a school of thought that sees gender differences as a reflection of biological difference between women and men, which is also called functionalist theory, which says that the male sex and female sex performs different functions based on which these have a difference in the social world. And based on their functional differences and physiological advantage of male, the male got more power compared to female. But this was rejected by the social constructionism. A school of thought sees gender differences as a reflection of gender social positions occupied by women and men. The functionalist and essentialism basically reinforces the essentialist viewpoint when they claim that traditional gender roles help to integrate society. In the family, women traditionally specializes in raising children and managing the household. Men traditionally work in the paid labor force. Each generation learns to perform these complementary roles by means of gender role socialization. But there are 4 important criticisms of essentialism or functionalism. They ignore historical and cultural variability of gender and sexuality. They generalize from the average, ignoring variations within the gender groups. No evidence directly supports their major claims. Their explanations for gender differences ignore the role of power. There is another conflict theorist of gender inequality. Conflict theorists believe that the root of male domination in class inequality. Men gained substantial power over women when the proletariat societies were first able to produce more than the members needed for survival. Some men gained control over the economic surplus. They soon devised means of ensuring that their offspring would inherit surplus. Frederick Engel and Lewis Morgan are the principal authors of this particular construct. In industrial capitalism developed the male domination which increased. Feminist theories and gender inequality is also an important social construct which defines the gender roles. Feminist theorists believe that the gender inequality is rooted in patriarchal authority, relations, family structure and patterns of socialization, culture that exist in the most societies. Women's reproductive function is the basic root for men's domination over female. Next, gender socialization is another important process which defines gender roles for male and female. Research conducted in early 70s showed that from the birth, infant boys and girls who are matched in length, weight and health conditions, those are matched in all terms of physical characteristics but still are treated differently. Girls tend to be identified as a delicate, weak, beautiful and cute in spite of their equal physiology with men. This equal strength in terms of their height, weight and health, they are considered to be weak and delicate. Boys tend to be identified as strong, alert and well coordinated. But often this dichotomous discussion between male and female loses the question of third gender. In a contemporary society, third gender is gaining importance because it is a human rights issue. It is a moral issue to treat third gender as equal as the male and female and give their basic human rights and ensuring the dignified life to them. Measuring gender bias, equality and equity are very important for studying the gender and sex concepts. Therefore, the UN and other organizations developed many summary measures of the gender development, gender empowerment, women autonomy, agency and agency. GDP losses due to economic gender gaps in selected countries shows that the many countries losing a huge amount of GDP loss, even as high as 30% or more than 30% of the country's GDP is losing due to existing gender gaps. For example, countries like Central Asian countries like Qatar, Oman, Iran, UAE, which are economically developed countries, even losing as high as 30% of their GDP. India also ranks among the high GDP loss countries due to gender inequality. Even the India also losing as high as the 46 lakh crore due to gender inequality, as McKinsey reports. We can easily accomplish an increase in 70% of GDP but just increasing the women employment by 10 percentage points from 31% to 44% by 2025. Just reducing the gap in one form of gender gap, that is employment, is able to increase the Indian GDP up to 70%, which is a huge economic boost for the country if we can reduce the gender gap. But if you look at the India's position in the global ranking, also India's different states of India in terms of their gender parity or gender inequality, the situation is not so good. But especially all the central Indian states have as low as the 0.49 to 0.42 in terms of their female empowerment index, which is considered to be extremely high inequality in the global standards, particularly the state like Bihar, which has as low as 0.42. And these are the highly populated states which contribute huge population to the India. Unless we improve gender parity in these states, it is very difficult for India to continue its higher economic growth and achieve the double-digit growth. Even those states which have highly developed, considered to be highly developed, they do not have a better gender empowerment index or female empowerment index. There is a need to improve gender empowerment index in all these states. For example, if you look at another important indicator, gender parity index, and how the Indian states fares in terms of it, again most of the central Indian states which ranks at the bottom in terms of gender parity index. Uttar Pradesh, Madhya Pradesh, Assam, Jharkhand and Bihar comprises the bottom 5 states, whereas Mizoram, Meghalaya, Kerala, Sikkim and Goa comprises the top 5 states. So the range is varying from 0.702 in Mizoram to 0.42 in Bihar. If you look at the employment trends in India, this continuously dropping and with increasing education, more surprisingly, they are dropping with increasing education. This is something which is surprising, and also it shows how the women's status in a country like India and how the gender empowerment is going on in the country. Even women empowerment or lesser women empowerment or higher gender inequality or lesser gender parity is also contributing hugely to the demographic and health consequences, negative consequences. The lower women's status contributes to higher fertility, lower health status on both women and children, and lower nutritional status of both women and children. Especially the early marriages and childbearing, which not only contributes to deteriorating women's own health status and nutritional status, but also they contribute to deterioration of their children's health and nutrition status. The early marriages and childbearing, which also contribute indirectly to lower educational attainment, effect on work status and their lower incomes, effect on their autonomy and fertility choices, which ultimately contributes to their lower status in terms of both demography, economy, social and health. Overall, unless we deal with the gender inequality or we improve the gender equity and improve the women's empowerment and improve the women's autonomy and agency, India can't achieve its economic goals or sustainable or millennium development goals, which although we failed to achieve our millennium development goals by 2015, basically one of the major reasons to not achieving millennium development goals was the high existing gender inequality and lack of gender parity. And by 2013, we are targeting to achieve the many sustainable development goals, but again achieving sustainable development goals also depends mostly on the how far we do better in terms of reducing gender gap, increasing gender equity and improving gender parity, because these are very important to achieve many of the goals mentioned under sustainable development. So understanding gender and sex involves some of the big questions, that is, to what extent does biology influence maleness and femaleness? So is there any relationship between sex and gender, and how the biology influence maleness and femaleness? Understanding this particular thing is very important. The second question is, are males dominate over females in all societies? That means are female sex is dominant over females in all societies? Then why, if there is only female sex matters, the domination of male should be consistent across all females, whether that is true or not, that is important. How similar are gender roles throughout the world? Okay, if the gender is uniform across the societies, or gender constructs are uniform across societies, that reflects in gender roles also? Are the gender roles are equal across the societies or not? Do women and men in the same culture communicate differently, or they communicate in the same way? This is also one of the important aspects. Then how can extreme gender ideology lead to exploitation of women? This is another important question which need to be dealt in this particular module. There are important references for particular this module are as follows: the Giddens social theory and modern socialism important. Within sociology, a brief but critical introduction is also very important.